Hello, can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. If you guys can have your video on, that would be preferred. It's going to be an interactive lecture. And just so I know that everyone can hear me okay. All right, so today's lecture is going to, I have the wrong lecture slides up. Today's lecture is going to be coding from scratch, and we're going to go over JavaScript, the terminal, and get Kraken. So this is going to cover lessons 6 through 10. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. All right, can everyone see my screen okay? And feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you have any questions, or when I ask a question, feel free to answer it. Feel as comfortable being as interactive as necessary. You don't have to listen to me talk the entire time. But yes, so this is coding from scratch, JavaScript, terminal, and source control. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is the programming language of the web. It is the only programming language understood by every modern browser, and it enables us to build the interactive websites we use daily. So essentially what it is, it's like the muscle of a website. HTML is the skeleton. CSS is what we put in design. It's kind of the artistic side of things. And JavaScript is the muscle. It makes it interactive. It's what's behind the scenes making everything happen. And it is understood by every single modern web browser. So it is well known. You're guaranteed to use it in the workforce. So if you have any questions, or if you don't understand any of the concepts I'm talking about today, please unmute yourself and just ask away. So in order for us to connect our JavaScript to our HTML file and have them communicate together, we must include a script tag into our HTML file. You're going to want to put your script tag at the end of your body before your closing body tag. The reason why you want to do that instead of putting it in the head, like where you put your CSS link tag, is because the page loads from top to bottom, the files. So let's say you had some JavaScript function, it's an alert, and it is after 5 seconds, something happens, right? But if, let's say there's a slow internet connection and it takes longer than 5 seconds for the page to load, your functions already had run, but the page is still loading. So it maybe have missed the alert. So that's why you want to put it at the end of your body, so it's the last thing that loads. So if we look at that, I have some code set up here, which makes this page right here. Okay, so I have some HTML, I have some CSS, and then I don't have any JavaScript yet because we'll be adding that as we go along. Directory, I can just put the file name, which is script.js. Now, the file name doesn't have to be script.js. It just has to be something.js. Okay? So that's how we get them connected, and that's how they can start talking to each other. So let's go ahead and jump into the nation. They're holding a value, they're holding some data, and we reuse those variables, and variables can change the information that they hold as we go along. So when you're declaring a variable in JavaScript, you're going to use the var keyword, which stands for variable, followed by the name of the variable, then an equal sign, and then the value of that variable. Now there's different types of variables. You have strings, numbers, booleans, and objects. I'm not going to really touch on objects too much, but I'm mainly, because that's going to come later, mainly we're going to focus on strings, numbers, and Booleans. So a string is a string of characters, anything you can type on your keyboard followed by quotation, surrounded by quotations. Then you have numbers, which is a number. You don't need quotations since it's just a number. So that could be 78, it could be 1, -4, 4.5, just any number. And then you have Booleans, which is true or false, or how the computer reads it, 1 or 0. So true means true, false means false. And then lastly, we have objects, which is kind of like the whole entire thing that has attributes. So let's say we had an object called student. The student could have different attributes like first name, last name, course enrolled in, and then they can also have specific functions associated to that object. So if we're looking at a student object, a function associated with a student could be like registering for a course, or studying, or any action associated with that particular object. In the example I'm showing you here, I am declaring a variable that is a string. So we have var, this indicating to JavaScript that we're declaring a variable. Then we have the variable name. And I just want to point out here that it's in camel case, meaning the first word is lowercase, and then the beginning of every word after that, the first letter is going to be capitalized. And this is the standard way of writing it in JavaScript. So we have student name, so our variable name is student name. Then we have our equal sign, and then we have Ricardo in quotations. So that means that this is a string type of variable. And then we end all of our declarations with a semicolon. So that's basically the gist of how to declare a variable. You could have it be named whatever you want, and you can set the value to whatever you need it to be. Now, this is a string. You could have a number or a Boolean. So for example, we can declare some variables. So if I have var age equals 21, that's an example of a number. We could do var is able to drink, and we can set that equal to true, because that's a Boolean. And then lastly, we can have name, which is going to be string, and we can say Joe. Okay, so those are 3 different types of declarations here. We have number, we have Boolean, and we have string. Are there any questions so far? Everyone feeling good? All right, then we'll keep on going. So next thing I want to talk about is if statements, or you can hear them as conditional statements, or you hear them as decision constructs. Either way, we're talking about if statements. Essentially, what an if statement does is we're checking a condition, and if that condition is true, then we want something to happen. So there's different variations of it. You have the if, which is simply if something is true, do this. We have if else, so if something is true, do this. If it's not true, if it's false, else do this. Then we have if else, and that's if you have to check multiple conditions. So maybe you're saying, okay, I want to check this, and if that's true, then go ahead and do this. But if it's not true, let's check if it's this instead. And if that's true, go ahead and do that. If they both fail and they're both false, then I'm going to have a fail safe, which is going to be my else. So for example, if we play with that here, let's say we have, and the way you write an if statement is if, then you have your parentheses, and then you have your curly brackets. So what goes inside of the parentheses is what you're checking. And this is where different operands come into play. So you have is equal to, less than, greater than, not equal to. So for example, if I'm checking age, so if age is greater than or equal to 21, then I'm going to console log, hey, let's get a beer. Okay, so if I run this, I should get, hey, let's get a beer because age is equal to 21, right? So sure, I'm in the right spot here. So node JS. And we can see here in our console, hey, let's get a beer. Now, if I were to change this age to 15, we shouldn't get any type of output. And we don't. So if I'm looking for different circumstances, so let's say we wanted to have an else statement. So else, we can console log, hey, let's get, oops, this needs to be a double quote here. Hey, let's get some ice cream. Okay, so what this is doing, we're checking to see if age is greater than or equal to 21. If that's true, then we're going to go ahead and get a beer. Else, we're going to get some ice cream. So if we save that, we should get ice cream because age is now 15. And that's exactly what we get. Okay, so let's say we wanted to check a different condition. Let's say we're targeting different age groups. We have like children, and then we have teenagers, pre-adults, however you want to call them, and then we have adults. Okay, so we are going to check if age is, let's say, less than 13. Then we're going to say, hey, let's get some ice cream. And then I'm going to check a second condition, because if it's not 13, then I want to check if they're between the ages of 13 and 21. So that's when we're going to use an else if age is greater than or equal to 13 and that's how, when you use two ampersands, so that's an and age is less than 21. So when you use an and, that means that both of these have to be true in order for whatever you write inside of the curly brackets to happen. So I'm saying age greater than or equal to 13 and the age is less than 21. So that's covering the ages of 13 to 20. So then if that's the case, then we're going to console.log, hey, let's see a movie. And then else, that should be greater than 21. Hey, let's get some, and we'll change this to beer. Okay, so if I were to run this right now, age is equal to 15. So that should fall into this category. So we should expect, hey, let's see a movie. So let's go ahead and save it and run this code. And that's exactly what we get. If we change this to 10, we should expect, hey, let's get some ice cream. That's exactly what we get here. And then let's change this to 45, and we should expect beer. Hey, let's get some beer. So this is the very basic of an if statement. Now, as time goes on, things will get more complicated and you'll start nesting things inside of other things. But this is a very important concept. You're going to use if statements all over the place. So are there any questions or concerns about the example that I've given or how if statements work, or questions in general? A head nod or a thumbs up? All right, cool. Okay, so that is if statements in a tiny nutshell. We're going to go ahead and jump to arrays. So an array is a data structure that we use to store values. You can think of them as a collection of values. You can use an array to store multiple values. So essentially, it's just like a list of things. You're going to have a list of strings, a list of numbers, a list of Booleans. Essentially is a list all in one thing. So if we look at the example here, we have var, so we're declaring a variable, fruit array, that's the name of our variable. And then when you see these square brackets, that means array. And then every element inside of the array is separated by a comma. So here we have an array of strings, which is the different fruit names. So let's say here, and I'm just going to comment this out because we don't need that. So let's say I create an array, and I'm going to call it groceries. And I'm going to make an array. So I'm going to have my square brackets. And then inside of them, I'm going to have a list of things I need to get. So let's say eggs, bacon, and coffee. Items. When you are dealing with a listed item, there needs to be a way of you tracking each item, right? So when you're writing a list, you usually number it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you're like, oh, what's item number 4? And you can kind of pick it from there. Same thing goes with arrays, except they're called indexes. So when you are looking at an index, you can pick out this certain element. But one thing tricky about computers is that indexes start at 0. So it's human nature for us to start at 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But with computers, you start at 0. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we look at this example right here, if I say groceries at index 0, we're talking about the first element in the array. Now, what I just wrote isn't going to produce anything. So I can console.log groceries at index 0. So what we can expect is for it to print out eggs, because eggs is index 0, bacon is index 1, coffee is index 2. So if I save that and I run it down here, we get eggs. Okay, so that's how indexes work. That's very vital to remember, especially once you start getting into loops and you start working. I'm sorry, was there a question?
Yeah, is this a dynamic array?
This is, well, there's multi-dimensional arrays, which is where you get into dynamic means it's for changing. So we can change this array. And I can show you how to do it, but there are different types of arrays. So you can have a multi-dimensional array where you're dealing with 2 indexes. So it could be like groceries 0, then 1, like that. So it looks kind of like a table, like a matrix. And then you're saying the first element in the second row. But you won't be dealing with that in this course. That's kind of more advanced. But it does exist. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I think I heard another voice in there. Does someone else have a question? Okay, well, I'm going to assume no. And if I'm wrong, just go ahead and interrupt me. All right, so if I do that, we get eggs. If I do 1, we should get bacon. If I do 2, we should get coffee. Okay, so that's how indexes work. Now, if we're trying to figure out the length of an array, that means it's the total number of elements in the array. So the last index in this array is 2, but the total length is 3 because we have 3 elements. And the way to print that, the way to get that is using dot length. If I do groceries dot length, that is going to return the total number of elements in the array. So if let's say you're given an array and you don't know what the last index number is, what you can do is figure out the length and minus that by 1. Okay, so if I do console.log groceries.length, we should expect to see a 3. Okay, so that's exactly as we suspected. And if we need to print out the last one, we can, let's say we have a variable called length and we set that equal to groceries.length. And then here we can do console.log, and let's just assume we don't know how many elements are in here, right? We're just given an array. we can do console.log groceries at index length -1. Okay, so this is going to return the value 3. So now length is going to equal the number 3. And then if we do 3 minus 1, that's 2. So we're looking at groceries at index 2, which is 0, 1, 2. We should expect coffee. And there we have it. We have coffee. And this printed out eggs because I have this console log up here. Okay, so that is the length and index. Now there are other methods that exist for arrays, and there are so many out there, so I highly suggest you checking that out on your spare time, but I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple. So one of them is called push. Let's say I forgot something on my grocery list and now I need to add something. So let's say orange juice. I'm going to do groceries dot push orange juice. Now, where do you think this is going to put it in the array? Am I going to have orange juice here? Is it going to be in the front? Is it going to be in the back? Does anyone have any idea?
At the end?
At the end, exactly. So if I console.log groceries, we should see orange juice at the end. And there we have it, orange juice is right here at the end. So that is the push method. Now, if we want to take something off, we can use the .pop method. So we do pop, and you have your parentheses there because it's a function. Now, pop is only going to take the last item off the list. You can't specify what number element you want. You can't specify, like if I were to write bacon in here, it's not going to find bacon and take it off. Pop is just going to take off the last item. So if we do pop and do the console log groceries again, we should see our original list without orange juice. So if we save that, we see we have our original list. If you want to challenge yourself, and this is what a challenge I like to do to give students, is let's say I wanted to remove bacon specifically off the list. Try to figure out what methods you can use in order to remove bacon. I'm not going to give it to you, the answer to you here, but feel free to message me outside of lecture or join me for office hours if you want to figure that out or if you found the solution. But that's a problem I like to give students working with arrays. But this is the main gist of arrays. You're going to have a lot more methods that you're going to be dealing with, but as time goes on, it's going to be different methods. So get comfortable in Googling, asking questions, and feel free to reach out to me. But as far as what I've shown you so far with arrays, are there any questions on that? All right. All right, so that brings me on to loops. So loops enable us to repeat a series of commands until a certain condition is met. There are numerous different kinds of loops, but I'm just going to focus on the for loops. Now there's while loops, there's do while loops, there's until loops, there's for each loops, for of loops, all sorts of loops. But the basic loop that you must know like the back of your hand is a for loop, because you can achieve anything with a for loop. Now, there might be situations where maybe an until loop or a while loop is going to be a better choice, but you can always do it with the for loops. So I'd want to make sure that everyone understands a for loop. So how you write a for loop is you have for, and then you have your parentheses. Inside of your parentheses, there's 3 segments. The first, and they're separated by semicolons. This first segment is declaring a variable that's going to act as your index of whatever you're looping through. It could be a string of characters, it could be an array, it can be an object. You could be looping through all sorts of things. But what you're doing is you're declaring a variable, so var I, and then equals 0. So that's essentially our starting point. Since most indexes start, well, all of them start at 0, you probably want to start your loop at 0. There are going to be some points where maybe you don't need to start at the beginning, and then that can change whatever value this is. But for this course, you're mainly going to be using I equals 0 for the most part. So that is the first segment. The second segment is where you're writing a conditional statement, similar to like what you did in the if statement. This is basically your stopping point. So whatever condition you write in here, if that is true, another iteration of the loop happens. Once this condition is not met, then it exits outside of these curly brackets and then jumps to whatever line of code is there. So that's your second part. The third part is where you're incrementing your index, or you could be decrementing it, depending on how your loop works. So for example, let's just write out some code here. I'm going to take this out here. So if I just wanted to print out every item on the groceries list, I can do a for loop for that. So I'm going to say for var I equals 0. We're going to start at the 0 index. I less than groceries dot length. The reason I write that is because I know the length is 3. So if I becomes greater than 3 or equal to 3, I know that's the end, because I, the last index, is 2, because it's always going to be 1 less than the length. And then I am going to increment I by 1. And then I'm going to console.log groceries at index I, because I is changing. So before I even run this, let's talk about it and what we'll see. So if we look at this here, we're starting at index 0, okay? So is 0 less than 3? Yes, it is. So we're gonna go ahead and print this out. So groceries at 0, that's gonna be eggs. Then we increment I by 1. So now I is equal to 1. Is 1 less than 3? Yes, it is. So now we're going to print out groceries at index 1, which is bacon. Then we add 1 to I. So now I is 2. Is 2 less than 3? Yes, it is. Groceries at index 2. We print that out, which is coffee. Then we add 1 to I. So now I is equal to 3. Is 3 less than 3? No, it's not. So we're going to jump out of here and jump out of the loop. Okay, so if we go ahead and run this, we have eggs, bacon, and coffee. Now, let's say we want to incorporate an if statement in here. Let's say if the item is bacon, I want to write, ooh, I love bacon. Okay, so if we do that, I'm going to write an if statement inside of my for loop. So if groceries at index I is equal to, now one thing I want to point out with is equal to, you'll see 2 equal signs and 3 equal signs. The difference is that 3 equal signs is going to check the value and the data type. 2 equal signs is just going to check the value. So an example of that is if I have a string of 2, so 2 in quotations, and the number 2, 3 equal signs is going to return false, because 1 is string and 1 is number, even though they have the same value of 2. If I do 2 equal signs, it's going to return true, because we're only looking at the value, which is 2. It's good practice to do 3 equal signs, because you're more than likely going to want them to be of the same data type. Okay, so is equal to bacon. Then I'm going to console.log ooh, I love bacon. Okay, and I want this to print out after I print out the item, so I'm going to move this other console log above this if statement. Okay, so what we should expect to see is eggs, bacon, ooh, I love bacon, and then coffee. So let's go ahead and run this. And that's exactly what we get. Okay. Any questions on for loops, if statements, arrays, variables, anything that we've covered so far? Good. All right. Oh, I think I see a chat here. Are there other ways to see the results of JavaScript besides using the console and VS tools? Yeah, another way that you can check out the console is if you open the HTML file here, and if we refresh this, and you right click, hit inspect, and go to console, you'll see it here. So there's a console built into the Google Chrome Inspector tools, or you can use the console in VS Code, which is essentially the terminal, which I will discuss later on in lecture. Are there any other questions? All right. All right, so that is loops. Now let's go ahead and jump into functions. Functions allow us to reuse a block of code without having to rewrite it multiple times. So let's say there is, let's say for enrollment, right? Every time we get a new student, you have to get their name, the course that they're in, enroll them, get their financial. There's certain things that you need to fill out. So instead of having to do that every single time manually, you can create a function to do that where you just pass in information and then it does all the magic for you. So that's where function comes into place. How you write a function is similar to how you declare a variable. So normally a variable we write var, but when we're declaring a function, we write function, the name of the function, and then you have parentheses, which we're going to pass on parameters. Parameters are essentially information passed into the function in order to make the function work. So for example, if I have a function that adds 2 numbers, I need 2 numbers in order to add. And that's going to be parameters. There are going to be some functions that don't require any parameters at all. And there you would just leave it blank. And then you have your curly brackets, and inside of your curly brackets is going to be the code that you're executing. So if we here see an example of that, let's say I have a function that has no parameters. Say function, and its name is going to be greeting, and then it's just going to say console.log hey. Okay, so that is a function, and all it does is it prints out hey. Here, I've only defined the function. I haven't done anything with it. I haven't used it. In order to use it, I have to invoke the function. That's one thing that you'll hear, or call the function. In order to do that, you write the name of the function, greeting, and then you have your parentheses. The parentheses indicates that it's a function. Now, we leave it blank inside because it doesn't require any parameters. If there were parameters, we would pass that information on. But since we don't have them here, we can just write greeting with the parentheses and the semicolon. So now if we run this code, we get hey. Okay. Now let's say there was a parameter. I wanted to put a name. So the parameter is basically, you're just going to put a variable in there, and then you can add that in here. Let's add a space, plus name. And I'm going to add an exclamation here. So here we should expect it to print out, hey, whatever name we pass to it with an exclamation mark. So here I'm going to pass on the name. Let's do Joe. And we save that. So now we should expect it to say, hey, Joe. And that's exactly what we get down here. Okay. Now let's say we had a variable. I have variable name, let's say first name. And I set that equal to Annie. Then here, I can just pass in that variable, first name. First name is equal to Annie, and then this gets passed on. So now name is equal to Annie, so we should get hey Annie. We save that. We have Hey Annie. Okay, so that is pretty simple functions. Functions can get complicated, and I'll show you a complicated one as we move along. But essentially, in a function, you can have a for loop that has an if statement inside of it. So things are going to start compounding on top of each other. So before I get into the hairy details, are there any questions on how a function is used, or how you set it up, or how parameters are used? Let me check the chat. All right. And Tony, you can use developer tools in Google Chrome or Mozilla. Do not use Internet Explorer. You will be very upset. So Chrome or Mozilla. All right, so that is functions. So with that brings scope. So scope is the area in which your variables and functions can be accessed. There's three kinds of scopes. You have global scope, function scope, and block scope. Global scope means that it's accessible from anywhere in the program, right? It's defined outside of functions, it's defined outside of blocks. I can call on that variable anywhere in my code. You want to avoid global scope as much as possible, but it is there. The reason why you want to avoid it is because, let's say you're dealing with first name, right? But first name, maybe you have to use it in different areas, in different functions, in different objects and things like that. If you have a global scope, you could be changing first name where it's not supposed to be changed. So things can get pretty messy when you do global scope. So avoid global scope as much as possible. Then you have function scope, which is declared within a function and is accessed only from inside of the function. So if we're looking at this function here, this name variable is function scope. I can only access name here. So if I were to put greeting name, we're going to have a problem because I didn't define name outside of here. It's only within the function, right? So I get this error. It's like, hey, what are you talking about? Name is not defined. It is only viewed when inside of the function. That's function scope. Then we have block scope. That is, it's new to ES5 and it's used through the let keyword. So we've been using var so far, but you can use let as well. There's also const, but you're going to learn that in the next course, so don't worry about that yet. It gives us the ability to have a variable only available for the block that it lives in, aka inside of the curly brackets. So anything inside of curly brackets is considered a block. So if I had an if statement, let's say if, let's go back to the if statements here. Let me comment this out. If I have, here we go. So if I have an if statement, let's say I have let activity equal ice cream. Okay. And here I will say, let's get some, and then I do plus activity. Okay. So this activity variable is only visible between these curly brackets. If I wrote activity here or activity here, I'm going to get an error because that is block scope. It's only between these curly brackets. Let is kind of like a temporary variable. I only need it for like a short amount of time and only this part of the code. So we're going to go ahead and use let. So if I were to run that, oh well, age equals 45, let's say 12. Let's get some ice cream. Okay, so that is the block scope. Then we have function scope, and then we have global scope. So here, age would be considered global scope. So I can use age in here. I can use age in a function. So let's say I wrote a function called how old, and I just do console.log age. Okay, so notice I didn't put in any parameters. I'm pulling in age from this global scope. So then if I call on how old, we should get 12. And then I'm going to go ahead and comment this out so we don't get the console log from there. Then we'll save it. If we run it, we get 12. So that's the global scope. I can use it anywhere. If you can avoid it, avoid it. All right, so that is scope. That is something I want you to always have in the back of your mind, because there are going to be times when you're working on a function and you're like, why isn't this working? You want to check your scope. Make sure that the variables that you're using can actually be seen where you are using them. So before I go on to the next topic, are there any questions about scope? All right. Oh, question.
How do you avoid global scope as much as possible? If it's
So yeah, you're gonna do like code blocks. You'll use code blocks for whatever you're doing in your code, whatever problem that you're solving. You want to use the let keyword if you can. So for the activities that are in this course, you're going to use a lot of global variables, so because that's kind of how it's set up, just so you're comfortable using that. But once you go deeper and your programs start to get more complicated and a lot longer, you're going to want to use the let keyword.
Okay.
And if you have questions, you're like, hey, I don't know how to not use global scope in this problem, just hit me up and I can help you figure it out.
all right.
Okay. Are there any other questions? All righty. So that is scope. Next thing we're going to talk about is DOM elements. So we've learned kind of like core concepts of JavaScript really quickly, but now you're probably wondering, okay, that's cool and all, but how do I make it do stuff with the website, with the application? That's where the DOM comes into place. That is the document object model. It is a programming interface for HTML documents. So basically, it is a visual representation of the HTML elements you place in your document. So basically, the DOM is this whole thing. Everything that I see on the screen, that's my DOM. There are different methods you use that you can interact with the DOM. So there is, you'll see get element by ID, get elements by class, get elements by tag, tag name. There are a bunch of them out there. I'm going to focus on get element by ID. And then I would highly recommend checking out the other ones that exist out there. But if we, let me comment all of this out because we don't need any of this. Okay. So here, start fresh. All right, so here I have my HTML file, right? And I have a number of elements. I have input elements, I have buttons, I have H1 tags, we have quite a few elements. So here, if we enter the fields below, first name, middle name, last name, we want it to print out hi, the entire name, right? So how we do that, we first need to grab the element, what the user types inside of that box. In order to do that, we grab the element by ID, meaning each element needs an ID. So here, I'm going to write ID equals, let's just say first. Here, we'll do ID equals middle. And here, we'll do ID equals last. Okay, go ahead and save that. So now, if I come over here, I can create a variable. Let's say var first name is equal to document get element by ID. And then you have your parentheses. Inside of the parentheses, inside of quotations, is going to be your ID. So if we look here, those IDs are first, middle, last. So since I'm just grabbing the first name, I'm going to say first. And then I'll grab the second one. And we'll do last name. Okay, so now we have grabbed all of these elements. All right, so that's going to grab the entire element, aka this whole input line. We don't want that. We just want what's inside of that. So if I show you here, we inspect, and go to the console, and I type in, let's just copy and paste this here. Oh, I didn't type anything. That would be helpful. Oh, I didn't refresh the page. Sorry, hold on. Did I save this? I didn't. That's fine. All right, so if I type in something in here and I do var first name equals document get element by ID first, and then I type in first name, we get this entire element. But I just want what's inside of that. So that's when we do dot value. So I could do first name dot value, and that gives me Cassandra. So here, back in my code, I don't want the whole, yes, I want to grab the whole element, but I just want the value. So I'm going to put dot value after all of these. Okay. So that's going to grab that information. And then in order to get a full name, I can just add all these values together because they're all strings. So var full name equals first name, and then I'm going to put a space because otherwise they'll all run together, plus middle name. Oh, that is not in quotations. And then plus last name. Okay, so now this should print out the whole name, right? Well, not print it out. The full name is now going to equal first, middle, and last name all together. So what I want is when that user clicks that button, I want it to say, hello, their full name, okay? But in order to do that, I have to add functionality to my button. So button, there is an attribute called onClick. You use onClick, and then you set it equal to the function name in your JavaScript file. So what it's going to do when you click that button, it's going to jump to your JavaScript file, and then it's going to look for the name of that function. Then once it finds it, it's going to go ahead and perform that function. So I'm going to call this function greeting. Okay, so I put the function name with my parentheses. I saved that. And now I have to make sure that there's a function called greeting here. So I'll do function greeting. Let's move this inside of my function, because if it's not inside of the function, then nothing's going to happen, right? So there we have that. But so far, we haven't printed anything out onto the actual page. In order to do that, we need to create an empty element here. So I'm just going to use a paragraph tag, okay? And I'm going to have an ID equal to result, okay? So there is nothing inside of this paragraph tag. So if I were to refresh this, there's nothing that appears there because I wrote no text inside of the paragraph opening and closing tag. But what I can do is I can grab that paragraph element. So document.get element by, oops, get element by ID. Its ID is result. And then I'm going to grab the inner HTML. And inner HTML just means whatever in between the opening and closing tag. So dot inner HTML. And then whatever I set that equal to is what the inner HTML is going to be equal to. So I want it to be hello plus full name. Okay. So now if we refresh this and I type this out, we get hello Cassandra Michelle Matos. Okay. Are there any questions about the DOM, interacting with it, functions, anything we've covered so far? Because after this, I'm going onto the terminal. Okay. All right. So I have a question in the chat. So the environment starts with the JS file itself, then global scope is something that is defined at the start. It doesn't necessarily have to be defined at the start. It just means it's defined outside of blocks and functions. So it can be in the middle of your code, but it's globally seen everywhere. Are there any other questions? So the DOM ID is not similar to the ID. No, it is exactly the same ID. So that's a good question. So the DOM ID is the same ID that you would do in CSS. So if you have an ID for a particular element that has special styling on it, you can use that same ID for DOM manipulation. So it is the same. And that's why you have to have unique IDs. So as far as CSS is concerned, if I had the same ID all over the place, the CSS, it's not going to break the CSS. It's going to apply all those stylings to everywhere that has the ID. The reason why ID has to be unique is when JavaScript comes into play. And I'm trying to grab an element with the ID result, but I have 6 elements with that ID. JavaScript's not going to know which one to grab. Then boom, there goes your program, and it was a mess. Any other questions? Or does that answer your question? Okay, cool. All right, so that is the DOM. There's also add event listener, which is basically the same functionality, well, not the exact same functionality of onClick. Add event listener is basically you can add a listener to any element. So for example, if I took button and I added an event listener and I listen for a click, then I can perform whatever function. Or I can listen for a key up, which is like on your keyboard hitting the up button. For the purpose of coding from scratch, I would just start off with onClick, not to complicate things. If you want to learn how to use add event listener, please come to office hours because it's a little bit complex. Well, not necessarily complex. Once you get it, you get it. But it does take some time to explain. So please message me if you want to learn add event listener, but you'll be totally, completely fine using onClick. All right, so Chrome Inspector, you've seen me use it, make it your best friend, okay? If there are times where maybe you don't know how to grab an element, or you're like, oh, should I grab it by the class? Should I grab it by the tag name? Should I grab it by the ID? Maybe you need to grab a whole section of things. Let's say you're making a multiple choice quiz and you need to grab all the answers and you have to see which one they marked. You're going to have to use different ways. There's different ways of doing that. You can do it by class, you can do it by tag name. There are different ways. So a good tool is to use the console in the browser. As you saw, I was typing in what I wanted to test out first, right? And then I noticed, and this is also a good way for you to see, oh, I need to add dot value in it because I don't want this whole thing. So make this your best friend. If anything goes wrong, there will be a giant red box here with your error telling you what line of your code it messed up at. So this is going to be your absolute best friend. Google Chrome has it and Mozilla has it. Just right click and hit inspect. Also, Google Chrome has a lot of built-in developer tools that I highly recommend digging in there. It's like plugins and apps for developers. It's super cool. Yeah, so make that your best friend. So now we're going to go ahead and jump into the terminal. I've been using the terminal this entire lecture, this right here. The terminal is an interface in which you can type and execute text-based commands. Normally, we're used to a GUI. So if we're here, right, I have my desktop, I right-click, I make a new folder, and I'm using my mouse a lot. Terminal kind of takes the mouse out of the equation, right? The terminal is a very powerful tool. You can do a lot of damage with the terminal, but I personally love it. So if I open my terminal, and if you're on a Windows, it's called the command prompt. You also hear a command line. You'll hear a different number of names for it. So here, this is my user, right? Cassandra Matos, that's the user on my computer. One of the most common commands that you'll use is ls. And that's going to list all the directories and files inside of this directory. So here, I want to jump into my desktop. So I'm going to change my directory. The way I do that is cd, and then the name of the directory. So cd desktop. I am now in my desktop. I can do ls to see what's in there. But let's say I wanted to make a new directory, right? I'm doing a new project. So I will make directory, mkdir, and then followed by that is going to be the name of your directory. Directory is just another name for folder. And let's say I call it part 2 yay. Okay. So now I've made that, and then if I do ls again, we see it right here. So now if I want to jump in there, I can do cfs to yay. So now I'm in that directory, and now I want to make some files in there. I know I need an index.html file. I know I need a CSS file, and I know I need a JavaScript file. So I'm just going to go ahead and make all those files at once by using the touch command. So touch.index.html, style.css, and then script.js. And we have that, and we ls, and then we can see that there. So as you can see, it is a lot faster to work in the command line than it is to use your mouse. Some other basic commands that you'll be using are move, and it varies depending on the type of machine that you're on. So Mac and Linux operating system, these are the commands ls, cd, mv for move, cp for copy, rm for delete, aka remove. And then Windows is a little bit different. dir, cd is the same, move, copy, and delete. There are a bunch of commands that exist out there. I do have a cheat sheet. Just go ahead and message me on Slack, and I can send that to you depending on your operating system. There's also a really great book out there that is called Learn Enough Command Line to Be Dangerous. So if you're really into it, I highly recommend reading that book. When I first started, I felt like a 90s hacker. I thought it was really cool, but it is really cool. I do suggest learning it. But basically how it breaks down is the file organization, right? So we have our root folder, which was my user. And then we have directories in there. Inside of those directories can be other directories, or it can be files, and a combination looks like a family tree. And that's kind of how that works. So any questions on terminal? It's a really quick rundown, but pretty much the basics that you'll be using it. As you go on in the courses and you go on to the next course, you'll be using more of the command line. But for now, this is just the basics. So any question on that? All right. So we'll go ahead and jump into source control, and this will be the last topic of our lecture today. So source control is a tool that allows developers to manage files file changes throughout the development process. It allows each developer to write and test code on their own computer without interfering with another developer's workflow. It allows developers to work simultaneously with teammates. It allows developers to go back in time and trace the source of bugs, and it allows us to easily version our code. So basically what it is, it controls your program from basically crashing. So let's say you have a group project, which you will all have by the end of this, and you have the main skeleton of your project, right? That's the main skeleton part's the main part, everyone's gonna be dealing with it. Now, let's say Jane is working on one feature and John is working on another feature, and they need to work on it at the same time. So what you can do is you can clone that skeleton, and Jane has it on her machine and John has it on his machine, and Jane can work out on her features and John can work on his features, and they don't mess each other up. So if John does something that totally explodes and breaks everything, it's not going to affect the main skeleton, and it's not going to affect what Jane is doing. So it allows you to, work on your features, mess things up, retry, try again, and then once everything is up and running and works well, then you can merge it into the main one. So your main one keeps developing as time goes on, but it's working because you're testing it in other environments. So it allows you to work simultaneously. It allows you to not mess with other people's code. It also allows you to go back in time. So when you are working on it and you're gonna do commits, commits are kind of like save points. So like when you're playing a video game, you like save a certain spot because you just beat level 2 or whatever. You can go back to that save point. That's the same thing here. You have a commit, you can go back to that commit. So okay, well, I know it was working here, so let's go back to this point and figure out what's going on. And that allows you to create different versions. So you have 2.0, 3.0, and so on and so forth. So in order to do source control, you're going to be using GitHub. There is an interface called Git Kraken that integrates with GitHub. So the first thing that you want to do is have a GitHub account. So go to github.com, sign up, and you'll have an account. So here, when you are creating a new project, you want to do a new repository. Okay? Then you're going to have the repository name, which is going to be basically the name of your project. So let's say you're building a, restaurant app. Okay, and you're going to go ahead and make it public. You can put a description, an app that finds restaurants. Make that as detailed as you want. And then you're going to initialize the repository with a README. Basically, that's a README file, and that's where you write information about the project. So then you click Create Repository. And there you have the repository. If you can see here, you can clone it from GitHub, but the curriculum goes through Git Kraken. So I would recommend, let me move this around here. So I would download Git Kraken and follow along. Oops. Oh, my computer froze. All right, so when you do that, you're going to create a repo just like I had showed you, and then you're going to open Git Kraken. You're going to click on the folder icon in the top left-hand corner. Then you're going to hit clone. Then you're going to hit github.com. And when you first download Git Kraken, you're going to connect it to your GitHub account. So make sure you have a GitHub account before you download it. And then you're going to choose where you want to clone it to. So I'm going to click browse, and I'm just going to put it in my desktop. So I'll do open. And then I'm going to select the repository that I want to do. And that was restaurant app. And then I can go ahead and clone the repo. Okay, so now I'm going to open that repo. And there we have it. So if I go to my desktop, all the way back here, we should see restaurant app. Okay, so here I have restaurant app, and I'm going to open it with my text editor. And I'm going to add a file. We're going to add an index file here, and maybe I'll write some index code, and I'll just write a paragraph tag hello. Okay. So I have now created a new file, and I wrote some code in there. So if I go back to Get Kraken, we see here in the top right, one file change in working directory. So I'm going to go ahead and view the change, and then it says the file that was touched, right? So in the green shows you all the new changes. So I'm going to stage the file, or if you have multiple changes, you can click stage off. So I'm going to stage the file, and basically what that's doing, it's like getting ready for that save point. And then we have a commit message. Basically what you want to put in here is what you did with the change in a very short descriptive way. So I just write added index. Okay. So then I commit the changes to the file. Okay. Once I have everything done and I want to upload it to the master, I can just click this button, push. And it's going to go ahead and push it to the master file. So if we go back to GitHub and I refresh this, we see that index.html file and then my comment here, added index. Now let's say we're in project phase and we have the skeleton built out. Now Jane is going to go ahead and work on her feature. She can branch off the master. So here, you click on master, then you are going to do create branch here, and then you can call it whatever you like. So you would probably call it the feature name. I'm just going to call it Jane. And there we have Jane. So if Jane makes changes to the files, she can make her own commits, but that's going to be saved in her special little branch. It's not going to change anything in the master file. Once Jane is done, everything's good, it's working, she can merge that into master. So you would just drag it. Let's see. Why is that? Oh, let me make a change here. Okay, usually there's a merge button. Let me try something else. Let me make a change here. I'm just going to add another change. Okay, and now I can, so Jane has made her change. She added styling. She's in charge of the CSS. So now we can merge Jane into the master branch. So styling's all good, ready to go. And then I'm going to merge Jane into master. So now whatever Jane has done is now a part of the master branch. So whoever clones the repo afterward is going to have Jane's styling added. So now we have that master branch, which is going to have everything, and then we can go ahead and push it. And then we will see the styling here. Oh. All right, so then we have that merge happening. All right, and the curriculum goes in great detail of step-by-step of everything that you can do. This is kind of like an overview. If you want to do GitHub through the command line, which is personally the way I prefer to do it, go ahead and shoot me a message and I can send you a tutorial on how to do that. If you're not comfortable with the command line, definitely stick to Get Kraken. The visual representation is a great tool. And a lot of developers these days do use that. All right. So that is all I have today. Are there any questions about anything that we covered? We covered a lot of topics. I see thinking faces. It's okay, you can ask me anything, even if it's not about what I talked about, it's about the curriculum or anything like that, because probably someone else has the same question. All right. Oh, wait, I see a question. What are the pros and cons for GitHub via command line and GUI? It's really just a matter of preference. I wouldn't say that there's any kind of pro or con to it. Knowing the command line is goes across the board, right? That's universal. Because there are different interfaces. There's other things that exist. It's not only Git Kraken. So you might have companies that use Git Kraken. You might have companies that use something else. But if you know the command line, you know, you can use it no matter what. But it's really just a matter of preference, because some people like the GUI, some people like the command line. I like command line, but other people like GUI. So it's really up to you. As far as projects being graded, how are projects being graded? It's a matter of, do you meet the requirements, and did you turn it in a timely manner? Any other questions? Anyone started JavaScript or need help on any of the questions? Got a few minutes to spare.
It won't let me continue on Exeter after I finish lesson 6. It won't let me go any further. Am I just locked out, or is that like a error?
Lesson 6. Do you have to submit something on lesson 6?
Yeah, there was some project at the end there that I did, but then it locked me out. I sent a request in asking why that happened, and I haven't heard back yet.
Okay. If you want to share your screen, I can see what's going on.
Okay, I won't be able to right now. I'm at Starbucks.
Okay. Go ahead and
later.
Yeah, send me a screenshot on Slack of what it looks like, and then I can kind of figure out what's going on from there.
Okay.
Cool. And then I got a question. What time is the project due on the 28th? It just has to be turned in by midnight. All right, well, if there are not any other questions, thank you so much for coming today. If you are kind of shy and you don't want to ask a question, feel free to Slack me or join me for office hours. I have them every Monday and Wednesday from 3 to 4 Eastern time, the same room that I'm giving this lecture in, so you can join me there. All right, well, thanks for coming. I hope you guys have a great day. The slides, I will post the slides on under the announcements. So I will make the slides available to you guys. All right, well, everyone have a great day, and please message me if you have any questions.
Thank you.
No problem.